Thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight. My name is Zoe Chiquain. I'm the Communications Associate here at the ACLU of Rhode Island. I'm just going to start off with a few housekeeping things. We are recording this webinar, and I will be sending out a link to the recording after the fact. Um, Also, I believe a transcription has been enabled, so if you want the live captions, you can find that in the bottom of the bar at the bottom of your screen. Likewise, there's a little Q&A box. If you have any questions that arise during this presentation, we're going to be throwing a lot of information at you. Please just click that little box, submit a question, and we're going to try to get to as many as we can at the end. Just to note, this presentation, we're going to talk about privacy and surveillance technology in Rhode Island, which is going to cover what automated license plate readers are, what's going on in city and towns, as well as the state as a whole, information about what data we actually have on these license plate readers, and the role that you can have in your community. I'm going to introduce now my colleague, Madeline McGonigal, who is the policy associate, to get us started.
Thank you, Zoe. Welcome, everyone. My name is Madeline, and we can just jump right on in about what automated license plate readers are. So the main question is, what are license plate readers? Throughout this presentation, I'm going to start referring to them as ALPRs. Just know that that is automated license plate readers. And so these cameras are stationary cameras placed throughout the state and the country that take pictures of license plates as they pass by, as cars pass by. And as I said, they're around the country and in the state of Rhode Island. They're used for a law enforcement purpose. They're used to compare license plate numbers to databases to find out if cars are associated with criminal activity and seek out people that could be talked to. Um, I will say ALPRs are a little bit different than other traffic cameras like toll cameras, speed cameras, and red light cameras. ALPRs take a picture of every car that's passing by, whereas toll cameras, speed cameras, and red light cameras have very discrete uses, and often their use is advertised before you pass by them. The thing about ALPRs is that they capture data about all of us and a lot more than just what our license plates say. They can indicate where you work, where your kids go to school, religious services you attend, what doctor you see, and what protests you attend. This map over here is a glimpse at some of the cameras that are around the city of Providence. And so another way we'll describe these ALPRs is flock safety. And so flock safety is a vendor of these cameras. They're not the only vendor, but they are a main one for many law enforcement agencies to purchase. This picture is what they usually look like. That little oval at the bottom, that's the camera. And then it's hard to tell from this angle, but that is a solar panel that helps the camera take photos. This is actually a picture of one on South Main Street in Providence. And so the thing about flock safety is that they have a number of problematic features that they tout when they're trying to get law enforcement agencies to buy their cameras. And so the first one we'll cover is their nationwide data sharing model. And so what this means is that a police department buys these cameras, places them throughout their community, and they can opt to join in the nationwide sharing model. This means that police department can access the information of any police department across the country that also opts into this model. What this also means is that vice versa, the agencies that are opting in can look at whatever Rhode Island municipality has opted into this program. As I said, that is one of the license plate readers around the state. That is a freestanding pole one. Some of them are sometimes on electrical poles or on pre-existing traffic lights. And so another concerning part of flock safety's model is that they have a lookup system which allows the police department that uses them, or as I said, part of the nationwide sharing model, to look up key features of a car. So say they're looking for a car that's a red Kia with a certain scratch or a dent on it. They can search by any of those characteristics. They can search by make, model, color, as I said, scratches and dents, but also the type of license plate, whether it's a standard metal license plate or a temporary paper license plate. Additionally, they can search by the state of the license plate And they can also search by bumper stickers or roof racks. And so how does this apply to us here in Rhode Island? By our estimate, there's about 240 flock safety cameras in 30 municipalities around the state. And so we'll get into those numbers a little bit more later, but that is our estimate based on a number of public records requests that we have sent out. And so bringing it more towards us, how does this impact our civil liberties? So there's a couple ways that these cameras present civil liberties issues. And so the first is that there are no laws governing the use of these cameras. This means that there's no meaningful safeguards around the protection of this data that these systems generate. This includes restrictions on how long the data is retained, who accesses it, and what it's used for. And additionally, these cameras present an issue called surveillance creep. And what that means is that the gradual expansion of the use of surveillance technologies beyond their original intended purposes. Sure, these ALPRs were intended to find stolen cars or other crimes, but they have the ability to enable much more widespread surveillance of the general public. Additionally, these cameras present the potential for discrimination. The history of surveillance in the US and racial discrimination is inextricably bound. Black and brown communities have disproportionately experienced the effects of limitless surveillance. And just as an example, law enforcement departments were found to have used surveillance camera footage to inappropriately monitor activists in the summer 2020 Black Lives Matter protests, which then kind of goes into this next bullet point, which these cameras could have a chilling effect on constitutionally protected rights. If someone knows that they're being watched where they're going to go protest or advocate for something else they believe in at a public meeting, they might be apprehensive to go and voice their concerns. And so these cameras additionally are known to have mistakes and misuses. Just jumping right in, the mistakes are very concerning. So specifically, Texas police tracked women suspected of having an abortion. So this is a screenshot of a network audit, which we will discuss a little bit later. But it basically just explains what police department has accessed cameras throughout the country to search for whatever it may be. So as it appears, the Johnson County, Texas Police Department searched a little over 83,000 cameras across the country to find the person who, quote, had an abortion, comma, search for female. Additionally, there have been reports of agencies accessing this information on behalf of federal immigration enforcement to target people. Specifically, ICE can ask the agencies that they cooperate with for access to this information or to look up a certain license plate that they know to find certain people. Additionally, these cameras use software to read these license plate numbers, which is inherently flawed. So if a license plate drives by and it has a 1 on the license plate somewhere, that software could read it as a 7, mismark it in their internal databases, and lead to the wrong people being pulled over or targeted. And that kind of goes into the next point where the databases where these cameras put this information are not as updated as frequently as they should be. So say there is a situation like that where the 1 was incorrectly marked as a 7, it may not be updated as soon as that's resolved, as soon as it's figured out that that was the incorrect number. So whoever it was could then continuously be targeted until that is corrected. And additionally, there have been numerous reports of police misuse. Officers can use the system to stalk or target their ex-girlfriends or ex-wives or ex-partners. And additionally, just last week, it was reported that police in Kansas used Flock to tie the writer of a critical op-ed to the alleged crime of putting up anti-ICE posters on public property. And so we're talking a bit broadly about mistakes and misuses nationally. So we wanted to bring it a little bit more local. To know what's going on in our communities at the state level, specifically, we'll start here. Late last year, the Rhode Island State Police launched a program to install 39 cameras throughout 22 municipalities in Rhode Island. The theory behind this program was to make a network of Rhode Island cameras and then to share the data and access to that data throughout Rhode Island municipal law enforcement agencies. As part of the permitting process for these cameras, the state police needed town approval from where the cameras were going to be. Of the 22 municipalities that the state police asked for permission, only 5 towns put it to a council vote, also subject to a public hearing. Of those 5 municipalities that put it to a vote, only 2 municipalities rejected installing the state police camera, which was Portsmouth and Warren. And additionally, part of the council process, Portsmouth and Bristol asked for the state police to provide them policies and memorandum of understanding to govern the use of these cameras in their communities, as well as to consider the sharing of this information that these ALPRs generate. As you can see, that map shows what municipalities have granted approval for this process. And so bringing it a little more locally to the municipal level, municipalities can purchase their own automated license plate readers. At the municipal level, as I stated prior, we sent a public records request to every city and town in the state. At least 20 cities and towns have ALPR contracts. On that list, there's a couple that say unknown. They have not responded yet to our request. This has also been going on for a while. Cranston, Pawtucket, and Woonsocket started the pilot program. They were the first 3 municipalities to explore the use of these cameras in our communities. Separately, this is still going on because Middletown is considering adding 6 cameras. So they have not yet decided on that, but it is in the has been considered by the town council, and it was pushed off for a little bit. Separately, if you were trying to count all those numbers that we have on the screen, it's 243 in total, which is including the Westerly camera, which is not a Flock Safety brand camera. That is a lot of cameras, and that does not include the number of state police-owned cameras that I've mentioned prior. So if you're wondering how you kind of keep on track and know what's going on in your community with the use of these cameras, there is a very important tool that we'll point you to. It's called a transparency portal. And so I will say at the outset, not every municipality in Rhode Island has one of these. The municipality that has the contract with Flock Safety gets to decide if they'll enable the transparency portal. And so if your municipality, if your city or town has shown up on one of those maps that I showed prior, take a look. Maybe there is a transparency portal for you. But so the transparency portal says some very important things just on its face. So it tells you what's detected, what's not detected, what the acceptable use policy is. It also talks about data retention, which this one on Woonsocket says 30 days. So keep that in mind for when we'll get to it in a minute. And it also tells you the number of cameras owned in that city or town. As you can see, Woonsocket has 15. And so this red box we'd also draw your attention to is the list of organizations that are granted access to whatever municipality it is, their data. This is Woonsocket's transparency portal. And so we just wanted to draw your attention to a couple things about Woonsocket's sharing capabilities. So first of all, in that box on this page, I'll point out the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, which is particularly troubling that Woonsocket shares their data with them, given that it was reported last year that the U.S. Postal Inspection Service is cooperating with ICE for federal immigration enforcement. Separately, let's dive a little deeper into what organizations access Woonsocket's information. And so this is the first part of the list of municipalities that Woonsocket shares their information with. The list goes on for a while, and you can see a bunch of different places: Virginia, Massachusetts, New York. And this is the next page of Woonsocket's list that they share it with. Another couple interesting ones: New York, as I said, Texas is on there, Virginia. This is still Woonsocket's list that they share it with. This is just the M through the P, I believe. And then this is additionally who Woonsocket shares it with. And then last but not least, the end of Woonsocket's sharing list. And so I will say not every city and town in Rhode Island has that same extensive list. But this transparency portal is very good to look at who your municipality is sharing with and just to see how long that list is. And so this is another interesting tool that you can use to monitor flock usage. So I will say that we received this, it's called a network audit, through public records requests. This is not like a transparency portal. It's just not out in the open for everyone to access. As I mentioned prior, when we were talking about how the police department in Texas used the flock system to find a woman suspected of having an abortion, this is a searchable log of all of the outside networks that have asked whatever municipality it is to look at their information. In particular, this is Cranston, Rhode Island's network log, and it is from the month of October 2025. And so, specifically for this 1 month, this is just a snapshot of the entire document that we received. The entire document is about 400,000 rows. So, just kind of put that back in context. There are 400,000 rows of other police departments across the country who have searched Rhode Island's data in the span of 1 month. And so we just wanted to zero in a little bit more on what this network audit can reveal to someone. And so much like that list of Woonsocket, who Woonsocket shares it with, there are various different police departments around the country who have searched this data. And so on the left, it says the organization name, Illinois, Pennsylvania, yes, Illinois, Florida, Ohio, the list goes on. As I said, only a snapshot of the 400,000 rows. And how many networks they searched is the next row, and then how many devices were searched. So that first one, Nelson County, Kentucky, searched 91,000 cameras across the country for, quote, investigation. And so that kind of gets into the next part of this, which is the requirement that if you're going to search for this information through this flock system, you have to include a reason as to why you're searching. That sounds pretty good for accountability. But then if you look at this list, it is very vague. And so a sufficient search reason could be as simple as investigation or, quote, IND, which means investigation. So the next question kind of is, what about laws? What are we doing in Rhode Island to make sure that these are not misused and by people locally and by people nationally? There are currently no laws in Rhode Island to regulate the use of these cameras. There has been legislation proposed at the state level every year since 2022. And unfortunately, none of that legislation has gone anywhere. What this legislation would do is that it would require each city and town that is either considering to buy this technology or has in the past require municipal approval, which that means it would go to a town council vote subject to public hearing. What it would also do is limit the qualifying crimes, if you can say, that would require the searches, the permitted uses of this system to just stolen vehicles, Amber Alerts, or other alerts to that nature, or investigating violent felonies or domestic violence offenses. And so on the other side of that column, we've been advocating for including a 21-day data retention of this data. And as I mentioned prior, and as we saw on the Woonsocket transparency portal, that data has been is being saved for 30 days. And so that is the standard flock contract time frame that the data will be retained. And so because we have no laws in Rhode Island governing the data retention of this information, we default to the 30-day data retention. We can make it 21 days legislatively. We can add in any time frame that we would like. We would advocate for that as well. And so other states are doing that. Virginia has a 21-day data retention time period, and New Hampshire has 3 minutes. So they keep that information for 3 minutes after someone passes by this camera. What we've also been advocating for is explicit prohibition on sharing information generated by these systems for the purpose of immigration enforcement or to be used to infer reproductive or gender affirming care status. So as I said prior, these systems can generate a lot of information about you, where you're going, what you're doing, what doctors you're seeing. And so using that data to infer where someone is going could be used against them. And so advocating for explicit limits to prevent sharing that information is vital in making sure that these cameras are not misused in this state. And additionally, I'd like to mention the Providence Community Police Relation Act, which was amended late last year to include explicitly to not share, as I just mentioned, that information for the purposes of immigration enforcement. It also requires that external agencies who are seeking Providence's information from these systems to agree that they to agree and comply with the provisions of that law, which means that they will not share that for the immigration enforcement. Um, and so similarly, you might be wondering how these cameras get removed. So contracts can expire. It depends on the municipality. It can be a year, it can be 2 years, it can be 3 years. And so the municipality can just let the camera contract expire, or they can be canceled. And so this is a list of the municipalities that have canceled their contracts with Flock this year alone. And so a couple of them are our neighbors in Massachusetts. But we do have some wins here more locally, as I said, in Warren and Portsmouth, who both rejected the Rhode Island State Police camera proposal. And so just kind of recentering us on where we stand, um, each municipality can be in a different situation. And so just kind of making sure where your community is, knowing that you may have a municipality owned camera, you may have a state police camera, you may have both, you might have neither. Um, and so just kind of making sure it's important to know where your community is before you start any advocacy efforts. Because it could look a little different depending on what camera situation it is. And so with that, uh, we can get a little bit in how you can help. And so looking back at the Warren and Portsmouth success, that was based on the advocacy efforts of concerned citizens who contacted their local officials and told them their concerns. And so depending on what your situation is with your community, making sure you're looking at local city and town councils to see if Flock is going to be brought up anytime soon on an agenda, or if you're considering it, or if they're considering ending the contract. Excuse me. It's also very important to speak with your local officials, and that kind of bleeds into the contract expiration date next bullet, where you can ask your local officials when the expiration date is, when the contract is expiring. And separately, we are putting together as best as we can a list of those expiration dates, which we will have available. And so speaking with your local officials is very important because you are the ones that elect them, and they do have to listen to your concerns, and they should be factoring in your concerns as their constituent. So making your voice heard to your local officials is vital. It's also important to advocate for municipal level ordinances, just like that one in Providence that I mentioned, and similarly to support future state level legislation, which, as I said, was introduced in the the legislative session for the last few years, few legislative sessions. It's also important to spread the word. Talk to not only your local officials, but also your friends and families about the dangers of these camera systems and the potential that they have. And so just a combination of all of those things, and depending, as I said, on what the camera situation looks like in your community, maybe it makes more sense to talk to your local official about when the expiration date is, because you have municipality owned cameras and not a state police camera. And so just kind of making sure that you're aware of what's going on in your community and making your voice heard. And so I turn it back over to Zoe very quickly.
Thank you, Madeline. So I know that was a lot of information that we covered relatively quickly. So please take a moment. If there's any lingering questions you have, open up that little Q&A box and send it in to us, and I'll be asking those questions to Madeline in just a moment. Um, while you're thinking on that, I want to very quickly highlight the QR codes that we have on the screen. The top one, if you want to sign up for our email updates about things that are happening, our events, civil liberties issues of all sorts in the state, not just privacy, then you can use that link or the QR code to sign up for emails. If you want us to contact you directly only about advocacy opportunities specifically in your city or town, um, that second QR code will take you to a Google form. You can let us know, like, you live in Barrington and what your email address is, and we will only contact you about when there's an action to take at, say, your town council, your school committee that is of civil liberties concerned. Finally, that last QR code, one final way you can help is to fund this fight against surveillance technology. Um, a donation through that code is tax deductible and will directly help our work here in Rhode Island. Everything you heard tonight has been the result of months of work in our office and dozens of public records requests, just so we can have a picture of what's happening in our state and try to communicate and educate and tell you what's happening so you can take action. Thank you for your support. Alrighty. A couple questions. Let's see. So first, I'll start with Madeline. How do I find my city's transparency portal?
Good question. So, like I said, it's really dependent on if your city has one. Um, as I said, they get to decide if they make that transparency portal. So, if you search on Google or whatever browser you use to include your city or town and then Flock Transparency Portal, it should come right up. Unfortunately, if it doesn't come up, then your city probably does not have one.
Okay, has Flock taken any public stance on the backlash of surveillance?
Yes, they have. They've really doubled down on their their efforts in saying that it is for law enforcement purposes only. But as I said, with surveillance creep, we know that's not true. And additionally, the CEO of Block Safety has sent out numerous communications in saying that the people are uh, using public records requests against them, and that it is targeting the people that use them. And so they've really tried to deny the fact that this surveillance is happening, but we've seen countless times that it is happening and that misuses are happening as well.
Okay, someone asked, has legislation been submitted this session?
Not yet. We believe it's in the process. And as I said, we are advocating strongly for those two additional provisions. And so, zooming back out, the things that were on the left side of the screen on the legislative page um, are have been in the bill for the last 4 or 5 sessions, and we have been advocating for the inclusion of the 21-day data retention and the limit on sharing. And so, long story short, is it has not been introduced yet, but we believe that it will be soon.
And I will do a little plug that we will have that information on our website also. So I'll include in the email that I send out to everyone with the link to this recording and additional information, a link to our legislative dashboard and update that when that bill number gets posted. Um, Samantha, sorry, I've been saying people's names, asked which officials would likely be in charge of contracts or legal limitations. So like who's the person to
To
take that?
contact. Yeah. Okay, that's a good question. It's really dependent on your city or town. Um, the state police program is a whole other story. You can absolutely contact your elected officials about how you don't approve that your town gave permission for this. Separately, if you're concerned about municipality owned cameras, you can talk to, if you have a city or town council, um, anyone on there, or if you have a mayor or a town manager or administrator. So any of those people are a great way to talk about your concerns for Flock. And I will give a little plug as well. We will be sending out a guide about municipal government. So if you're not sure if your city or town has a town manager, administrator, mayor, town council, city council, whatever it may be, you can take a look at that guide we're about to send out and go from there.
The next question. What is the process for cities or towns to cancel a contract if they decide they do not want the cameras? So instead of letting it expire.
Mhm. They can just decide to cancel the contract. Most recently, I think the one that comes to mind is Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so if a city or town decides that they don't want to continue working with Flock, they can just vote on whether they're going to do so and just cancel it.
Next question. Thank you everyone also for sending in very good questions. We've got a lot going. When state legislation is introduced, will the ACLU send it out to the mailing list? I'll make a note. Yes, I'm the one who sends out a lot of the emails. So we will make sure to send it out to everyone who registered. And also, if you want to sign up for local advocacy things, we can also include that.
And I will say, sorry, Zoe, to interrupt
Yep,
you.
please.
So once we do have legislation introduced and once it does get sent out to you all, absolutely send in testimony, show up to testify if you feel comfortable. Um, People always want to hear from their constituents and how things impact them directly. And so we would very much encourage you to contact your elected officials.
And we also have a lot of resources on that if you don't know where to start. Um, okay. Of the municipalities that have agreed to state police cameras, so this is a two-part question.
Mhm.
Which are the five that had a public hearing on the request?
Of the five that had a public hearing, it was Bristol, Exeter, Middletown, Portsmouth, and Warren.
And do those communities have cameras active or just granted approval for installing? I feel like that's also a
Um,
bigger question about
about,
installation.
yeah. Yeah. So, off the top of my head, I don't believe, if I'm interpreting that question correctly, it do they have their own municipality owned cameras? Is that the question?
It was if they've been approved, are they active or are they already been
Sure.
installed?
Sure. So it's really hard for us to know that, mostly because this program is not the most forthcoming in one where the cameras are going into if they've gone up yet. It's more so just a matter of seeing them in your community. And so if you know that your municipality only has a state police camera and you see one of these cameras in your municipality, then it's most likely that's the state police one.
Does the ACLU have a draft municipal level ordinance people could use to advocate for guardrails in their own city or town?
So we are working on one. That's how I'll phrase that. Yeah.
So it's once we have that resource, that is another thing we can add to our website. Not to be repetitive, but we do
Yeah.
have, that's where we put most of our materials.
Yeah.
Let's see, just give me a second. The Rhode Island ACLU Facebook page incorrectly states Bristol Town Council vote was 3-2. The actual vote was 4-1. Can you correct? Um,
Yes, so it was 4-1. If you watch the camera or the recording of that council, it's a little bit confusing. One of the counselors says that they vote in agreement of approving the camera, but then raises their hand to say no. So that is just our error on that part.
okay. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to find it. Um, who asked the state police to set up the flock camera program? Did they get a grant? Is it covered under police powers or some other directive, legislative or otherwise?
So they did receive a grant in October of 2024. It's one of the federal COPS grants. It's they asked for a broader amount. They received about $4 million. The flock safety program is just a subset of that grant that they approved or received, and they received about $600,000 for the flock program.
Okay, what if my town councilors will only talk about public safety, especially after the shooting at Brown University? What do I tell them?
That's a very good question. Um, Public safety and privacy can coexist, is what you can tell them. Um, we would point to the legislation that has been introduced in the past, as well as any ordinance that any council has approved. Um, Nothing in the legislation that we have supported would have impacted any investigation done at the Brown shooting. And so, as I stated, there's the legislation permits very discrete uses of these cameras, and it also would permit data retention. So, as I said, none of that would have impacted the investigation of the Brown shooting, and so that is something that you can tell the town councilor is that it just reins them in a little bit. It doesn't impact investigations.
How do you find out exactly where in your town the cameras are located?
That is a good question. Like I said, it's kind of hard. A lot of the police departments don't say exactly where they are. Um, it is the argument behind that is that if someone who is suspected of wrongdoing knows that a camera will be around them, they'll go a different route. And so the main answer to your question is that you just see them. And so we included that picture in the one in the beginning, but separately, there are a couple resources that are not ACLU affiliated. They are citizen-run projects where people document where the cameras are. So if you're very concerned about where a camera is and then you don't know if you've seen one, take a look at any of those websites online and research a little bit online.
Okay, we're still going strong. Do you know who will be introducing the legislation in the House and Senate?
We do not, but in the past, it has been in the House, Rep. Joe Solomon and Rep. Dawson. I don't believe it's been introduced in the Senate in a while. So, um, there isn't an answer to that part.
Okay, why hasn't the statewide legislation passed in the past few years?
So there has been widespread opposition to this legislation from the Police Chiefs Association in the state of Rhode Island and Flock itself. And so the Police Chiefs Association has testified against it, as well as individual police chiefs, both on on their town's behalf and the Police Chiefs Association's behalf.
Um, Someone says, as I am listening, I'm uncertain if one or the other, municipal owned versus state police owned is more worrisome. So which one should you be more concerned about, municipal owned versus state police owned?
You know, both are, I don't want to say both are concerning, but they are. They're concerning for different reasons. And so, look at Providence. Providence has 60 cameras, but they also prohibit any cooperation with ICE. So that's good on the one hand. The amount of cameras is troubling, but any other municipality where it doesn't explicitly have that prohibition on sharing with ICE. And so, on the one hand, municipalities can basically share with whoever they want. On the other hand, the state police program is troublesome because it's creating this widespread network of Rhode Island cameras to be used internally in Rhode Island, but also it's kind of the entire state. And so making sure that you know that both are troublesome is kind of key.
And also there's different processes to
Mhm.
ending the contracts or having them be removed.
Yep, exactly, exactly.
Okay, if ALPR use is limited to law enforcement, what role would the Woonsocket Housing Authority play in receiving or accessing the information?
That's a good question. And I really don't have a great answer for you. And I think that that question could be, you could list any agency on that list and it would be the same question. What business does Houston, Texas have looking at Woonsocket's cameras?
Okay, the questions are slowing down a little bit. Have I already asked, you've talked a little bit about being like tracked by the cameras. Could you elaborate more on how that, like what you mean by that?
Sure. Um, it's easy to imagine that these cameras are recording you walking into whatever religious services you're attending or what doctor's office you're attending. And they're not. They're they're taking photos of your license plate as it passes by. But the thing is, there's so many in the state of Rhode Island that you can piece together based on each individual data point where a person is going. And so kind of making sure that each individual data point can infer something about a person. So if you're driving by a certain camera every Saturday or Sunday, it can be inferred that you're going to a certain place. Same with the location data that's generated when you're driving by. You can infer that you're seeking out a certain doctor, or if you drive by the same camera every morning at a certain time that's near a school, um, things like that can just be inferred by where you are at a certain time.
I will add to that actually that the more cameras there are, also the more information there is about each person going various places. And I think this might be the last question. I've heard that ICE uses local police departments as data brokers for backdoor access to flock data. Um, do you know the ways that can be prevented?
Um, I don't, I mean, so there's a couple ways to approach that question. So that's kind of what I was getting at earlier when I said that law enforcement agencies throughout the country have conducted searches on ICE's behalf, or if they are just letting ICE use their system. Um, And so I think that the best way to do so is to have explicit, like in Providence, non-cooperation with ICE is ideal. But then that opens up the issue of, if whatever municipality in Rhode Island has doesn't share with ICE, but then shares with any other municipality in the country, there's nothing stopping that other municipality from sharing with ICE or letting ICE access their system. And so um, there isn't a perfect answer to your question, just because the key is not letting ICE have access to anyone's cameras. And in a perfect world, that would be the case. But um, it's hard to decipher that.
Alrighty, fantastic. I think that is all of our questions. Thank you all for sticking with us. We're a little bit um, ending a little bit early, but I think that's um, let's see. Oh, now more people are sending things in. One person just made a comment that the observation about Texas accessing Rhode Island's information is very telling. Um, okay, I think that's pretty much it. Thank you all so much. Again, we will be sending out the recording of this. We will be sending out information that we've talked about, the list of municipalities, um, as as we know so far at this time, who has what cameras. If you have any more questions, you can email us, info@riaclu.org. I'm sorry, I didn't put it on the slide. Um, and if we get any specific questions that we can answer, we'll include that in the response. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for caring about privacy, and we will see you next time.